In my mind, the scariest game for Kansas State on the schedule in 2025 is the Baylor Bears. And of course, we're going to tell you why on this special crossover edition of Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into a special college crossover, Locked On College Crossover with Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Baylor. I'm Christian Rao, the host of Locked On Kansas State, here with Cam Stuart, host of Locked On Baylor, and rocking that hockey jersey. Edmonton Oilers got a little bit of Canadian in you today. I had a joke, let you know I was South Canadian on this episode. So
I heard that.
Welcome into the show. It should be a really good time today, and we should have some. I have a bone to pick with you. I think you have a bone to pick with me about these rosters, especially in the second segment, talking about our quarterbacks. And we just have a lot to talk about. I think that Baylor and Kansas State is going to be an epic game, and it could be a quote said trap game in the near future for one of us. So let's discuss that and talk about it on this show. Before you do so, this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your money with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for how much? 50% off your first year. Absolutely incredible. Cam Stuart, the Baylor Bears had an interesting season last year. If we had to just put it in like a paragraph form, how would you explain Baylor's season from start to finish in 2024?
I can give it to you in one sentence. The first half of the season was not the Baylor Bears football team, the second half of the season was 2-4 start, 6-0 finish to the regular season. It becomes one of the kind of surprise offenses in America, definitely in the Big 12 as well. And a lot of those offensive guys coming back for 2025. There's some hype here, Christian. It's been a while since we've had some preseason hype. There's definitely some high hopes for this Baylor team going into 2025 with that Sawyer Robertson, Jake Spavital-led offense. Man, we're under 100 days here. We're under 100 days till kickoff, and the temperature is really starting to rise in Texas. Oh, yes.
Well,
and
you know that
also they are ready for football.
Well, under 100 days for when Kansas State kicks off. Because
no way.
Yeah, you get to see them in week 0. And I'm making sure everybody knows, okay? I'm going out on the world tour here to make sure to let you know that Kansas State is the reason you get college football this year. They are the first game this season against Iowa State in Ireland. Dublin, Ireland should be exciting. Hey, the flip side for us, though, Kansas State, it was the opposite. We started 7-1 and then fell off to 8-4. You guys had a hot start or hot finish. We had a hot start. And then kind of the wheels fell off. And unfortunately, the wheels fell off against a different Texas team, Houston Cougars, which was like the non-expected thing for us. I did not expect that to happen any way, shape, or form. And then Arizona State, and it just fell off. But found a way to come back. Rutgers had a nice comeback bowl victory against the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. And to me, I also think that there's a lot of momentum with Kansas State. And this is why I think this is an interesting conversation to have with Baylor. You have all the momentum on your side after having a hot finish. I think there's a lot of momentum on Kansas State's side after really a kind of a chip on their shoulder aspect. And then you look at what happened this offseason. Retention was huge with Kansas State. Almost no one left the transfer portal. I think they had a great transfer portal, although the rankings say no. We talked about that on an episode earlier over on Locked On Kansas State with the portal Brian Smiths talking about transfer portal rankings. And then they had one of the best recruiting classes in the program history, Cam. How can you not be excited about Kansas State football when you're rolling into the new year, knowing you have that type of momentum? I can tell you why. You're a Baylor Bears fan. That's when you can be excited about it, right?
Yeah. And it felt like from our standpoint, Kansas State kind of just sort of flew under the radar with that. I'll put it in quotes because it's a mini collapse, right? From 7-1 to 8-4, because you look at the conference, right? Utah and Kansas were the hot picks to win this conference. They both failed miserably. Colorado kind of does prove that they were supposed to be here. BYU has a season that people weren't really expecting. And so somewhere in the middle there are a couple of forgotten about teams, like Baylor winning 6 games in a row to close the regular season, or Kansas State going 1-3 to end the regular season. And I think for both of these teams, it comes back to something similar in that there are plenty of returners, a ton of retention from these teams last year. And obviously 2 different cases, like Baylor finishes strong Kansas State was still picked as one of those top tier teams, right? It was Utah and Kansas, but K-State was right there. And so it's like, well, if you were high on them last year and you were high on them through 8 weeks with the roster largely the same, why wouldn't you be high on them going into 2025? And that's why I think, the Cats are still very much in that tier of teams that could win the Big 12 championship, which I know we'll talk about later in the show, but there's more teams in this conference than most conferences that you could say can win the title. But yeah,
I say any conference.
I mean, probably. I don't know what they're doing in the Big Sky this year. I don't know how that's going to, or the Sun Belt, how that's going to shape up. That's a different crossover for a different day.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just kind of funny looking at these two teams where what all it comes down to, because, Baylor was picked to be, one of the bottom 4 teams in the conference last year. Kansas State was picked to be one of the top 4 teams. And yet it all comes down to retention. That's what it matters for us when it comes to the podcast. And that's what it matters for these rosters, what it means going into next year. And Baylor and Kansas State are both in similar spots where they didn't empty out the cupboard in the transfer portal, and they didn't need to completely replenish it through the transfer portal. They kept a lot of key guys, and they were able to get some plug-and-play starters through the portal. And I would say both of these schools definitely going in the right direction with their recruiting momentum for the near future. So it is kind of interesting when you look at how different the teams in this league are, but you look at a team that started out 7-1 and 8-4 versus a team that starts out 2-4 and ends 8-4. Ton of similarities there. That's why it's
definitely a ton of similarities. And then you brought up the fact that Baylor was predicted towards the bottom of the Big 12 in the media day polls, if you will, preseason. You kind of almost want to be there, right?
Love
After
it.
what we've seen over the last couple seasons. I mean, last year, Arizona State obviously defies all the odds, blah, blah, blah. We've heard it over a time and two. And then TCU, just 2022, when we won the Big 12 championship, they were predicted 7th in a league where there wasn't as many teams as there is now before all the expansion. They found their way to the national championship game that year. We don't have to talk about the finish, what happened there, just in the sake of Big 12 years. But for the sake of Big 12 years.
If we have some time at the end, I would love to talk about it. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we'll put it on the docket here. Put it on the docket for a bonus episode here on Locked On College Crossover. Why TCU faltered in 2022.
Sparse through it.
Real good. But honestly, I think we should probably get to the fact of what we came here to talk about. I think this is the scariest game in Kansas State's schedule for 2025. And there's a lot of reasons I look at it. One, when I look at Kansas State's schedule, I look at obviously Iowa State. That's a first big test, no doubt about it. It's going to be a national spotlight. I've talked about it for quite some time on my show, but that's going to be a game too. I think that could be a coin flip as of right now. My opinion will change most likely later on. Not too worried about the non-conference of Kansas State. Then we play UCF, who, probably going to be towards the bottom of the conference as Scott Frost brings them back to life.
At home. Yep.
At home. And then we have Baylor on the road. And the reason I'm scared about it is because when we look at your schedule, if we learn anything about Baylor by October 4th, when when Kansas State comes to Baylor, the Bears will be tested. That will be probably the most tested team at that point in the Big 12. You got to take on Auburn. You got to take on SMU, take on Arizona State. Two of those teams were in the college football playoffs last year. Baylor has a tough schedule on the docket to begin the year. If you talk about how great of a hot finish they had, they must have a hot start if they want to be a Big 12 or potentially a college football playoff contender. And then in the middle of the year, they got to worry about the Wildcats. That's a tough game for both sides.
Yeah, and that's why I think it can be kind of a trap for Baylor because, I don't think Kansas State's going to be sneaking up on anyone. I think they're going to be a preseason top 25 team, and I think they're going to have a good record going into that game. So not a classic trap in that sense, but like you said, they've been so hyper-focused on, a fan base, as a coaching staff, as a team on this first month of the year, with Auburn as kind of this novelty facing an SEC team. At SMU, playoff team, home against Arizona State, playoff team, at Oklahoma State, who should be better than last year because the bar is extremely low and they're a tough team to play in Stillwater. And then bang, you've got Kansas State at home, which should be a benefit, but still, probably a top 20 team before you have a bye week and your schedule gets a lot easier. Like I look at the Kansas State side of this thing, like Iowa State, who knows? That's a toss-up. That should be a classic matchup. Army will make you stub your toe, but I don't think you'll lose that game. So you're looking at a 4-1 record at worst, I would say. That's me, not Christian. 4-1, I would say. I don't want you to jinx anything, Christian. Going into that game against Baylor, and it's the exact opposite, where this is the first time in a month that you really get to prove yourself. And especially if that's a loss to Iowa State to open the season, that's another month and a week till October 4th that you can really prove to people like, hey, this is a good team that we're playing, and we need to make a statement in this game. So I think from the Baylor side of being kind of worn out of looking at that schedule and, maybe having an easy game in the second week of Big 12 play with Oklahoma State. I use easy in kind of quotation marks, air quotes. And then bang, you got Kansas State before your first bye week. It's not an easy one. It's one that you're probably limping into that game, even if you are, 4-1 or God forbid 5-0. Like even if you are that, you're still looking for that bye week after how much you've been tested. So this is one from the Baylor standpoint. Like, look, we're talking about Auburn, we're talking about SMU, we're talking about Arizona State as the team that won the Big 12 last year. But here's a team that could win the Big 12 this year coming up right after it.
Yeah, we know two things, Cam. We know two things as of right now. One, there's no film in this camera that you and I are looking at right now. And two, you can't jinx anything. I threw the entire salt shaker across the diner, hit the old lady in the head. We got nothing to worry about in that case. You can't jinx anything. Hey, you said it though. 5-0. There is a strong potential. Kansas State could be 5-0 heading into that game, potentially 4-1. If you look at the Baylor side before we hit the break here, there's a spot where you could say potentially 5-0. It's a tough task. You could go, but at the same time, that floor is probably 2-3. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean that's the hope, right? Definitely. If it were a 5-0 start, that would be probably the best start Baylor's ever had. Maybe not. They've started 5-0 before, but with that kind of a schedule, Baylor doesn't go 12-0. They've never done that. So that would be an insane start to the year. But yeah, I think the expectation is to be at least 3-2. And that you wouldn't feel too great to be 3-2 just because you hyped up the season, and I'll be, scorched earth on Locked On Baylor. But if you're 3-2 and then you've got this opportunity to beat Kansas State, which is probably a ranked team, and you're 4-2, you're feeling really good at that point. But yeah, I would say 2-3 would be, I hope to be the worst case scenario. And if that's the case, you still got a whole month and a half, 2 months basically left of the season to make up for it. And for a group that was 2-4 to start last year, they don't want to do it again, but they know that it's something that you can climb out of.
All right, Cam, get ready to walk 50 paces because I am ready to duel with you in this next segment here. Avery Johnson, Sawyer Robertson. We got to talk about the quarterbacks of the Big 12. We'll do that next right here on this Locked On College crossover between Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Baylor. But first, Cam, I got to ask you a question, and this is a really solid question. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered where did all your money go?
All the time.
Yeah, me too. All the time. Well, between dining out, personally for me, online shopping and entertainment, it is very easy to lose track. And that's where, and here it is, Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. No. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in just one place. So you stop managing your money, Cam, and you start building wealth.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I've had a really hard time personally, a really hard time spending money on food delivery. Monarch Money helped me budget smarter and save so much more. So bad. Really bad. Really
Same.
Bad. It's terrible. So I really appreciate Monarch Money for trying to help me get a little more bucks in my pocket. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Welcome back to this Locked On College crossover, Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Baylor. I'm Christian Rao here with Cam Stuart. And as you can see, he's got his guns in holster with a cowboy hat ready to roll. And I'm going to turn my hat on backwards here because it is time for the duel of this segment. And it's going to be quite an interesting one. And this, if the eyes that I'm seeing from Cam Stewart right now are anything what we're ready to go.
Got the big iron on my hip. Let's do this thing.
It's going to be real intense. Avery Johnson to Sawyer Robertson. That's the conversation we're going to have here. Look, there's been a lot of different conversations that have happened over the past few weeks, and I think most of it is due to boredom because we are in the offseason. We're in that time of the period of the college football offseason. But also, when you look at the entire Big 12 as a whole, there's not another conference, not the SEC, not even the Big Sky, as you mentioned, Cam Stewart, that has a better quarterback positional group from top to bottom. I'm talking from UCF to Kansas State to Arizona, you name it. There's at least there's great quarterbacks in this conference. No other conference can say the same at this type of level. But when
do not let the media tell you that it's the SEC, because they will try to tell you these whole few months. They will, but Christian's got us right. Like it is the Big 12 from top to bottom.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it in my mind, and it's really true. And when you're talking about the tippy top of this conversation, Cam, I think both of our quarterbacks deserve to be in the conversation now. And I think that is a factual statement. Now, if you want to start getting opinionated with this, I think that's when you decide who's number one, who's number two, and beyond. Now, I think you have a prime reason to say Sawyer Robertson deserves to be one of the top. I think Avery Johnson deserves to be towards the top. But I have a bone to pick with you before we dive into this conversation.
All right.
Sir, on Locked On Big 12, you had some nice conversations, some strong words against my Avery Johnson of Kansas State. What's so wrong with Avery Johnson? Why don't you like this guy?
So you know what has really bugged me about Avery Johnson, Christian, is that I like Avery Johnson. Like I was right there with the Kansas State fans going into last year. I was all aboard the Avery Johnson hype train. I was like, I've heard all about this kid. I've watched his highlights. Like I'm ready. I'm in. And what I don't appreciate now is anointing him as the best in the conference. Because is he up there? I absolutely think he's up there. But I've been so caught up in this Sawyer Robertson, Sam Leavitt debate that all of a sudden a couple of weeks ago I started hearing Avery Johnson thrown in there, and I'm whoa. I like me some Avery Johnson. But when Sawyer comes into the team got much better, like leaps and bounds. I'm not here to say that Avery Johnson made the team worse by any means. But when the going got tough towards the end of the season, we didn't see exactly the Avery Johnson we were promised once there was some film on Avery Johnson. Again, still like the guy. Think he's a legit dual threat guy. Probably the best dual threat in the Big 12. I think that's fair in saying. I know Utah likes Devin Dampier, but he loves throwing the ball to the other team. Avery Johnson, not as much. But when I look at the stats, the side by side, you want to tell me Avery Johnson's a better running quarterback than Sawyer Robertson? Of course he is. I'm not going to argue that. But what I care about as a fan and a semi-analyst is the total yards. We're going to go like Moneyball on you, Christian, right? Okay. On base percentage. Who cares if it's a walk or a hit? That's what I care about. Total yards. And for as much as Avery Johnson is a much better running quarterback than Sawyer Robertson, 3 times as many rushing yards, an absolute 11th guy that you need to guard down the field. He had 16 more total yards. 16 more total yards than Sawyer Robertson last year, and did it in basically 3 more games than Sawyer Robertson did. So again, do I think Avery Johnson's in that upper tier? Yes, he is. Is he Sawyer Robertson? Christian, no, he's not. He's not. Like I'm saying, he threw more picks than Sawyer did in again 3 more games. So give him that, but only comes away with 16 more total yards. If he was the top tier or the top quarterback in this conference, his numbers should be blowing away Sawyer Robertson with with basically 12 more quarters of football. The only guy who did that last year, the only quarterback that blew Sawyer Robertson away with their 12 full games and Sawyer Robertson's 10 and a half, basically 9, was Shedeur Sanders. And he's not walking through that door. So I think Avery Johnson's in that top tier, but I don't think he's as good as Sawyer Robertson. Am I wrong? Because let me know if I am.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you here. I'm going to give you a rebuttal. I'm not going to disagree with you, and I feel like I can't disagree with you in a hat that strong as well, just for main principles of my personal just manhood on this case.
Yeah, you're South Canadian, but that's a very American thing. You can't
100%
on this. Yeah,
100%.
Your American ideals coming through.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. The South Canadian sliding to the side on that side. But let's talk about that Avery Johnson conversation. I don't disagree with you. One, I completely agree with you that he is the best dual threat quarterback in the Big 12. That's fair. But we don't have to go any more farther than that because we don't.
Yeah, good, because I can't think of many others right now. So
yeah, and I will say that is a true statement. And you're right. He did have some issues.
Best in the state of Kansas. How about that? Definitely best.
I mean, that is easy. And we don't have to go any farther than that. There's no rivalry in the state of Kansas. Now, if we want to even go farther than that, yes, he had a lot of issues towards the end of the season. He was learning, right? And we're at this point in time, and I think many tend to forget because of the expectations of Kansas State just winning a Big 12 championship just a couple years ago. Avery Johnson had to get over the fact that he was not Will Howard. He was not Adrian Martinez. This was a new type of offense that was led by Avery Johnson, the quarterback that was picked to be the leader and let Will Howard go to Ohio State, to move on, to decide not to give him NIL. And I think that was important for his growing. Now, obviously, starting 7-1 and falling off definitely gives a bad feel, a bad taste in your mouth when you're trying to talk about these rankings. But I lean back to what he has around him. Last year, that wide receiver group was subpar, in my opinion. He didn't have a Josh Cameron like Sawyer Robertson has, like Baylor has, in my opinion, all Big 12 honors. And obviously, target share for Josh Cameron was insane last year. Jace Brown's a great wide receiver, but he didn't have that type of receiver. Now Jace Brown is back, and they bring in size with Jaron Tibbs and Jared Bradley, something that Kansas State, let alone Avery Johnson, hasn't seen in quite some time. You talk about the tight end room of Kansas State, one of the best tight end rooms in the country, led the entire country in red zone touchdowns as a tight end group. You put that all together with a speedy Dylan Edwards in the background. He doesn't have to be the best quarterback in the Big 12, but he might have one of the best surrounding casts that help levitate him to the top. That's my rebuttal. What say you?
Can I rebut the rebuttal a little bit?
Rebut the rebuttal, sir, as long as you tip that cap.
Okay, I'll tip the cap a little bit. Don't get used to it. But talking about Josh Cameron, because it's a fair point, but what I would say back to it is, and I love Josh Cameron. I think he's one of the most underrated receivers in America, let alone the Big 12. But Josh Cameron was not Josh Cameron before Sawyer Robertson was the quarterback. Here's what I used with the Sawyer Robertson-Drew Aller debate, was that Sawyer made some of these wide receivers big-time players. Like he unlocked them. I mean, they had that potential. He unlocks them. Drew Aller for Penn State does not. And Avery Johnson, I don't think did as much in 2024. But here's the point where I'm definitely going to agree with you on, and then sort of rebut it, is like, he was in year one. Like, you've got to play. Most of the time, what we see with quarterbacks, even some of the really great ones, is you've got to play a full season, man. Like, you got to get that under your belt and actually see the game 12 times, right? And so I think that's where I don't want to poo-poo the Avery Johnson season so much, because, he's still learning. What I would say to that as well is we were blessed. Sawyer Robertson was in the same position. He was also in year one as a starter and learning what the offense was, a totally new offense, and he really hit the ground running. The difference, he was not taking over for Will Howard. He was taking over for DeQuan Finn. So there is a bit of a difference there. So yeah, I still like Avery. I do. I don't love a completion percentage like that. That's something that is huge for me when a guy can't throw the ball into the ocean at certain points of the game. A 58% completion percentage versus Sawyer being over 65%. But definitely, I still have him in, I'll call it the top 4 quarterbacks in the Big 12. My mind instantly goes to number 3, but I'm going to be a little conservative here because I got the cowboy hat on and put him at least on the Mount Rushmore of 2025 preseason Big 12 quarterbacks.
When you think of the top 4, and I think that I can agree with you on all of these as well, if you're thinking what I'm thinking, and no particular order, you're thinking Avery Johnson, Sawyer Robinson, Sam Leavitt, and then Rocco Becht.
Yeah, I personally like Rocco Becht. I can hear a case for Jalen Daniels. I can hear a case for Noah Fafita still, even though that was kind of a step back last year. I'd take Rocco over both those guys. I'm starting to hear the Connor Wegman stuff. I don't respect any A&M quarterback really, because they haven't had one in 10 years. But I can see, I saw him play a lot in high school. I could see a lot of the potential there. So I can hear that argument, but yeah, I'm in terms of guys I'm wanting on my team, Avery Johnson and Rocco Becht round out that top 4 for me.
one of these days we need to have a conversation.
Oh,
Whether
and
it's on the Big
Josh
12
Hoover.
squad.
So I always forget to mention Josh Hoover. Pure quarterback ability. I might take Hoover over Rocco Becht, but
Ooh.
I think because I think he did it with less than Rocco Becht did, but I think Rocco's a guy who can cover up a lot of weaknesses too. But I always forget to mention Josh Hoover, mainly because he's a TCU guy, but he was pretty dang good last year. Just that team had a lot of deficiencies. Anyway, sorry.
We got to find a way to, at least for one segment of Big 12 squad moving forward, where we actually talk ball, maybe, potentially.
We'll
and we have
think about
that
it.
Big 12 quarterback ranking. Yeah, we have to think about it.
Ease into it.
Speaking of the Big 12, let's talk about the outlook of what to expect on this entire conference, one that has more parity than any other in America. Next, right here on this special Locked On College crossover of Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Baylor. If you haven't already, what are you doing? Hit subscribe. Locked On Kansas State, Locked On Baylor, special college crossover here with Christian Rao and Cam Stuart. Let's talk about this Big 12 because, as of always, it's wide open. And it seems like it's even more wide open after the latest news potentially of BYU's season being over, Cam Stewart, with Jake Reftlock potentially no longer being the starting quarterback with all the allegations happening. Look, we don't want to speculate, but there's allegations. There's one thing. And then on the other side, there's the BYU honor code, which could be, regardless of what happens in the civil court case, could be the end of his BYU career.
I think we're talking. Yeah, I think we're talking about a very good chance he's not their quarterback this year, right?
I think so too. And again, without speculating, but if you look at the past with BYU athletics, you look back to like Jimmer Fredette back in the day, what they did with
Brandon Davies.
That was a team that could have went very far in the tournament, and they didn't care. It was the honor code. They were worried about their image, and they took care of business. So if they continue on with that same path, they're not going to give a pass to their starting quarterback. With that being said, I personally had BYU as one of the teams, especially since Kansas State didn't play them this year, as a Big 12 championship team. I thought they were a team that in the running. Without Jake Retzlaff, though, this team, I mean, we're talking, I think, ceiling of 8-4. Am I wrong to think that?
Yeah, I mean, Christian, I'd really need to crunch the numbers and look at the schedule. I will say the only benefit, I would say, like football-wise, of not having Jake Retzlaff, if you want to find a silver lining of BYU fans, is I wouldn't have said he was one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the conference last year.
That's true.
They won 11 games. And so they can make up for a lot of it. But it's still like you're going in the whole offseason with him being your starter and getting, another year older and another year more wiser in that system. You might be talking about, being 11-1 at the end of the regular season instead of 10-2, which I know is splitting hairs, but that's a big difference when it comes to the college football playoff. So yeah, without the quarterback and the quarterback being out of the picture in late May rather than January, then yeah, I probably put them out of this race.
Speaking of another team. Yeah, that's true. This race is wide open. And I feel like even without Retzlaff, BYU still could find themselves in the race. Look, again, as we go into the conversation, Arizona State was predicted last at this time last year. They found a way to do it with what they had on the team. Speaking of probably the team that has the biggest, what's the word I'm looking for here? The most hype on the Big 12, Texas Tech. Texas Tech is spending so much money in this transfer portal. When you look at the transfer portal rankings, they sit atop the top, not just the Big 12, but some in the country. If you look at depending on what national rankings you're looking at on 3, 24/7, blah, blah, blah. Texas Tech, are they actually for real? Or is it just because they're spending a lot of money, they're getting a lot of traction?
Well, the answer is the latter. Like if you're talking about it right now in May, the answer is the latter. They've gotten a bunch of traction because they've went out and spent a lot of money and they've went out and got some guys that you've heard of as the casual college football fan. But I think this is going to be a case study, Christian. Like, Colorado kind of did that in Deion's first year and they were awful. And they didn't do it as much in the second year last year, and they were pretty good. And so it's going to be interesting with how the power dynamic of college football now. It's the SEC, the Big Ten, and everybody else. Well, the top of that everybody else is the Big 12. So can the Big 12 be the conference that's taking the spare parts from those top two and bringing up the guys from the smaller conferences? And can they sneak into the playoffs that way and take on the quote unquote big boys that way? I think that's what's going to be fascinating about this Tech team. But like the Avery Johnson thing, I've bought into the Tech dark horse thing so many times. I'm not doing it this year. I'm just not. I think they'll be a good team. I do. I think they'll be better than 6-6. I think they'll be a little bit worse than 10-2. But I can't buy into the Tech dark horse thing for like the fourth year in a row. I just can't do it. So I think they'll be good. Now, do I have them on that top echelon? Because I think of like 3 or 4 teams that as we sit here in May can feasibly win this conference this year. I just don't, probably because I put more merit to roster retention and bringing guys back that we know can play in this conference and can play in those systems. But they're close. Like, would it stun me if they actually did go 10-2? Well, first off, yeah, because they'd never win 10 games. They hate doing that. But like, not, it wouldn't totally floor me if they ended up like that, because that's basically what happened at Colorado last year. So
fair enough. All right, final question here as we wrap up this college crossover. Locked on Kansas State, Locked on Baylor, and Cam, I'm going to throw it at you right here. To me, this is an interesting one, and this goes back to the whole parity thing of the Big 12. There's got to be somebody who finishes last, right? There's got to be somebody who starts from the bottom, makes their way to the top. Arizona State was that last year. But you look at teams like Oklahoma State, Utah, and Arizona, who obviously fell off expectations last year. A lot of defensive issues of Arizona. Obviously, Ted McMillan they wasted that last year. Noah Fafita had a tough year. Brett Brennan experiment's terrible. Utah and Oklahoma State, which head coach is going to come back from the dead, right? Out of those 3 teams, not all 3 of them will finish at the bottom. There's just no way in heck it's going to happen in this Big 12. One of those teams are going to get back, revive themselves. Which one will it be?
I hate to do this. I hate to pump up these guys' tires. I don't like doing it. But if I had to pick between those 3, it's probably Utah, because of the injury situation they had last year, because of the rotating door, or it felt like a rotating door at quarterback. It was just, there was a bunch, and all the 1-score games. Like, I don't like that excuse. Like, if you're 5-7, you're 5-7. I don't care how many 1-score games you played. And trust me, we've done this at Baylor a few times in recent memory of, but they hung tough in so many of those. That doesn't matter unless you get better the next year. And I think Utah has that capability. I'm not on the Devin Dampier train. I'm really not. But I think there's still a lot of pieces on that team that can make them a bowl team again and maybe stub some toes along the way. I think Oklahoma State's still a mess right now, and I think Arizona is just going to be really bad. I think a lot of us thought that way about Arizona State going into last year. So, hey, there's always a chance, like you say. But I would have to pick Utah of those 3. I'm going to flip it on you before we get out of here. We talk about like those upper echelon teams, those 4 or 5 that could really win this thing. If any of those are going to fall flat on their face, who would you think it's going to be?
Oh, man. Just for the sake of my brand, Iowa State. I think Iowa State, it would be, and the meaning behind it would be they just show up completely flat in Dublin. Look, we've seen that happen in the past with Dublin teams. The teams that lose, Nebraska. Yep. And Nebraska, which pushed Scott Frost out eventually as well, right? So, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Yeah. So I'll go Iowa State there if I had to pick one. Okay. But look, Arizona State, I think they bring back some decent retention as well, although they missed out on some of their top players. Baylor, I think, is a top team in my opinion. Texas Tech, I'm right there with you on your opinion as well on that one. And then, of course, Kansas State, and I don't think they're falling flat this year. So I agree with you on the Utah take, and I think Iowa State is the team, if any, will fall flat and drop in the rankings.
Yeah, I don't mind that. Again, I like Rocco, but when you come to a quarterback conference that's this good, and you have a quarterback, like I would put Retzlaff in that same category, who's very good, but isn't necessarily going to win a game for you by himself, the way Avery Johnson can do if you're facing a soft run defense, or Sawyer Robertson can absolutely do, then that leaves a door open. And look, Baylor still has a lot of question marks to figure out on the defensive side of the ball. I'm not saying they're going to fall flat, but like there's definitely some question marks there. But I think both these teams, you don't kind of have the national hype around Kansas State this year. I wouldn't say you have it for Baylor too, but there's some people that are saying, hey, look out for them. sneaky, sexy pick in the Big 12. Stupid, sexy Baylor. That there's kind of a little bit more talked about for Baylor than Kansas State, but I think these two teams have just as good a shot as any. That's why I like doing this one, Christian. It's good stuff.
You have until the end of August, that's when your season starts, to get a t-shirt that says Stupid Sexy Baylor and wear it on this episode, because that needs to be a shirt branded by the one and only Cam Stewart of Locked
Shout out
On
Homer
Baylor.
Simpson, baby.
Thanks everyone for listening to this Locked On College crossover. If you haven't already, hit subscribe wherever you're listening, either if it's Locked On Kansas State or Locked On Baylor. We'll be back here with another episode soon. You and I are going to do this again very soon, because this was way too much fun. Please like the video, please subscribe. And this has been a Locked On College crossover of Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Baylor.